Okay, hi, good morning everyone. I hope you're well. First, just some announcements. Our Tuesday share for the entire year is sponsored by Rabbi Foyle and Sharon Auman in memory of their parents, Edith and Rainer Auman, Yona ben Sadok, Zichrono Livracha, and Esther Bas Rafael, Hashem Minkum Damam, and their son, Rav Shmuel Elio Auman, Rav Shmuel Elio, Zichrono Livracha, ben Rav Rafael. May all of the learning for the entire year be le'iloi nishmatam. In addition, all shiurim of all types today, Tuesday, January 16, are dedicated by Mrs. Hach in memory of Kayla Bas HaChaver Moshe Mordechai, Zichrono Livracha. And she added that Hitler robbed her of a Jewish education, but she spent her life catching up, attending shiurim, and proudly supporting her family's efforts in Limud HaTorah. Again, we're very grateful, and again, may the Limud of the entire OU Center today be Le'iloi Nishmata. I think that is it. Again, we're always very grateful for the Hachzakas Torah. So we are continuing with some inyanim of Kiddush and Havdalah. How we got onto this is an association that's too convoluted for me to reconstruct, but Lamaisa, we have been talking about Kiddush and Havdalah. And again, just to mention a few halachos, we did see the basic idea that the Kiddush that is recited Friday night. So first of all, someone did mention, and they are correct, that the minhag in Eretz Yisrael bichlal, both among Ashkenazim and Sephardim, is generally, unless you have kind of an American Kehila, generally Kiddush is not recited Friday night. And this is based, again, as they say, this is actually a machlokas, Rav Yosef Karo and the Ramah, based on the Gemara in Arvei Psachim. Just to remind people, the Gemara in Arvei Psachim does record the minhag of Kiddush b'beis Knesset, but according to the halacha, no one is yotzei with the Kiddush b'beis Knesset, because ein Kiddush el b'makom seuda, you're only yotzei Kiddush if you halachically have a meal, and since the people who daven in Shul are not eating in the Shul, nobody's yotzei. If nobody's yotzei, what's the purpose? So the Gemara says, this is Gemara, the Gemara says the purpose is that there used to be orchim, guests, itinerant people, poor people who would eat in the Shul. So the Kiddush was made for their benefit. This is what the Gemara says. So Rav Yosef Karo says the following: since Bisman Hazeh, which is already the 1500s, certainly today, it was not the minhag for aniyim to bedafka have a meal in the shul. They would go to people's homes or whatever it would be. There is no longer a justification for Kiddush b'beis Knesset, and therefore it should not be recited. I'm talking about Friday night, and therefore it is a bracha levatala. That is Rav Yosef Kairo's opinion. The Ramah says that the minhag of Ashkenazim is that since the Chachamim made a takana, albeit for aniyim, and the reason doesn't apply, but as is true with many aspects of the liturgy, once it's a takana, it should be followed. Now, Rav Yosef Karo records, after he says that it's better not to say Kiddush and Shul, he says, V'chein minhag Eretz Yisrael. So apparently the minhag of Eretz Yisrael is earlier than Rav Yosef Karo. He already records it as the minhag of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore even the Ashkenazim who follow the Ramah's Psakim in Eretz Yisrael, the general custom is not to make Kiddush Friday night and Shul, unless somebody's mamish eating there. If somebody's mamish eating there, then of course you can, that's for sure. But if nobody's eating in Shul, you don't. Okay. So that's why if you haven't seen Kiddush b'beis Knesset in Eretz Yisrael, it's because even among Ashkenazim, Rav Yosef Karo was made that the minhag of Eretz Yisrael was not to do it, and therefore Ashkenazim did not change that minhag. Just to give you an interesting example in reverse, the Ramah, who died very young, the Ramah died in his 40s, the Ramah was the Rav of Krakow. That was the Ramah's Stellar. So if you go to Krakow to this very day is a very, very beautiful city, and there are many, many, many shuls. I mean, most of them are not functioning as shuls, but the binyanim of the shuls are still there. Unlike Warsaw, which was 95% destroyed, both by German bombing and by Allied bombing, Krakow was left intact, and in some ways it's a bit of a sinister reason. Krakow was the capital of Nazi-occupied Poland. Hans Frank Yimach Shemo was the governor general. And because Krakow had beautiful architecture, it does have beautiful architecture, he gave orders that the buildings should be spared. Kill the people, kill the Jews, that was no problem, but spare the architecture. So as a result, all of the synagogues, and I mean the Nazis used them for whatever they used them for, but all of the synagogues are still intact. Although, as I say, most of them are not used as synagogues, but some are. And one that is used to this day is the base Knesset of the Ramah. The Ramah's Shul is in Krakow, and you can daven there. Usually there's a minyan, not necessarily local people, but there are enough visitors in Poland, which is another interesting shaila. Now, should we be supporting Poland? The amount of money that from Yidden, from Israel and from America put into the Polish economy is pretty high. And all right, so people debate, is that a proper place to put your money? But okay, I don't want to get into that. But you can daven, 3 times a day in the Ramah's base Knesset, and they even have the seat of the Ramah that is blocked off, so nobody should inadvertently sit in the Ramah's seat. But what's interesting is that when Hasidim go to the Beit Knesset of the Ramah, they daven Ashkenaz. They do not daven Sfarad. They say, what type of chutzpah would it be that we should go to the father of Ashkenazic customs and do different minhagim? So even Hasidim will defer to the nusach of the Ramah in the Beis Knesset of the Ramah. So we have a similar development the other way around. When the Talmidim of the Ramah and later the Gra came to Eretz Yisrael, they deferred to the old minhag of Eretz Yisrael not to recite Kiddush b'Beit Knesset. But at least in Chutz La'aretz, the Ramah does record that the Ashkenazic minhag is to recite Kiddush b'Beit Knesset, even though there are no orchim. So I'm going to go with that minhag a little bit, because you immediately have a certain problem. And that is, one is not allowed to eat or drink until they're Yotzei Kiddush. Now, if I'm the guy making Kiddush, let's assume I'm the Chazan or I'm the Gabbai, whoever makes Kiddush, right? So the question is, if I'm not Yotzei Kiddush because I don't have mizonos or I don't have bread, then how am I allowed to drink the wine because I'm drinking without a Kiddush? If there's a piece of cake there, okay, that's fine. I can make Kiddush and eat a piece of cake, right? And that might be the easiest solution. But if all we have is the wine, then how can I even drink the wine? So because of this, many have the minhag that even though a gadol makes Kiddush, the wine should be drunk by a katan. So the gadol makes a borei pri agafen, with kavana to be motzi the katan, and the katan drinks, because if the gadol would drink, he would be violating the halacha that you're not allowed to drink without a valid kiddush, and it's not a valid kiddush. So the question then becomes, what type of katan? Everything in halacha, we keep on going further and further. Katan or katana, boy or girl is fine, but the question is, there are 2 levels of katan. Katan shehigia lechinuch and katan shelo higia lechinuch. Katan shehigia lechinuch is a child who is old enough to understand halachos and mitzvahs. Now, of course, this is not a single age. This may depend on the nature of the mitzvah. But with respect to a given mitzvah, he's old enough to understand what it means. And at that point, I'm chayav to train him. A katan shelo higia lechinuch will be a child who's so young he doesn't really understand, like a 2-year-old. Now, once again, this is both age-dependent and mitzvah-dependent. But there is a shiur of higia lechinuch, lo higia lechinuch. So you got a problem with either katan. Because if it's a katan shehigia lechinuch, he's also not allowed to eat before Kiddush, because I got to train him in the law of not eating before Kiddush. So how can I give him the wine? He's not Yotzei Kiddush. Elamai, I got to use a kid who's so young that he's lo higia lechinuch. Then we have a problem. How can I make a bracha on wine if I'm not going to drink the wine for a katan? My only justification is chinuch, he's lo higia lechinuch. I can't make a bracha for a 6-month-old if I'm not going to drink it. I can make a bracha for a 6-year-old, to be motziim, because that's chinuch, but I can't make the bracha for a 6-month-old. So you have a dilemma. Should it be a katan she'egia lechinuch, because that will give you the right to make the bracha? Or should it be a katan shelo egia lechinuch, because that'll avoid the isser of giving him to eat before Kiddush? So l'maisa, the poskim say that it's better to have a katan she'egia lechinuch, because that will enable you to make the bracha. And in terms of the chinuch on the isser of eating before Kiddush, some say ketanim don't have that chiyuv at all because they're weaker, etc. And just like for fasting, we don't say when a kid is 6 years old, he should fast on Yom Kippur or whatever it would be. So even for eating before Kiddush, we're not overly strict. Now, there is another way, which is maybe the simplest way, and that is, there is a way that even without mizonos, the Mekadesh could have what is halachically called a meal. Now remember, as we discussed, there are basically 3 different ways you can have a meal that qualifies for Kiddush. One is hamotzi. You eat a kazayas of bread. Of course, that would require benching. Okay. The second is, what we do Shabbos morning usually, is a kazayas of mizonos, which can work here too if there's mizonos. But the third is drinking a revi'is of wine can qualify as a makom seuda. Now, a revi'is is a halachic measurement, a very important measurement. And like every measurement, there are all sorts of machloksim, but let's go with the simplest measure, 4.0 fluid ounces. Drinking 4.0 fluid ounces is a revi'is of yayin, and that becomes a makom suda. But this gets a little complicated too, because how does it overlap with the requirement of drinking Kiddush anyway? In other words, let's talk about Kiddush, a regular Kiddush. Let's talk about the Kiddush you make at home. Right? Forget about makom suda. You're going to have a whole meal. Makom suda is not your problem. So the halacha is that the kos of Kiddush must hold a revi'is of wine, meaning you cannot make Kiddush on a cup of wine that holds less than 4 ounces. The amount of wine that has to be drunk, however, is not 4 ounces, but what is called malo lugmav, the amount that would fill up one side of your cheeks. Now that depends on how big your jowls are, but generally speaking, the normal halachic definition of malo lugmav is rov revi'is. Now, if a revi'is is 4.0, so rov revi'is would be 2.1, right? Now, so here's the question. I make Kiddush in Shul. In order for me to be allowed to drink the wine, I have to have a seuda. So even if a normal Kiddush would just be 2.1, here I would have to drink 4.0. But the question is that 4.0 in addition to the 2.1? Meaning the 2.1 I have to drink because of Kiddush, and the 4.0 I have to drink because of Seuda? Or do you go with two birds kill one stone?
Two birds kill one stone.
My American novel. What's the saying again? To kill two birds with one stone. Okay. What a decline. Anyway, so the thing is, you kill two birds with one stone. So the concept would be, by drinking 4.0, I'm covering the 2.1, which is the shesiyah for Kiddush, and then I have the Seudah. But so L'chatchila, the Mishnah Berurah says, you should keep them as two separate measurements. So the guy that's making Kiddush in Shul should drink 6.1 fluid ounces. That means 2.1 for the drinking of Kiddush, and another 4 for the Seudah. But the evidence, that's difficult. He can drink 4.0, and that will count for both. But again, the important point is that simply drinking the amount that is sufficient for Kiddush generally is not going to be enough here, because he would not be allowed to drink it unless it's a makom Seudah, and Seudah requires hamotzi or mizonos or a whole revius of yayin, which is 4.0, right? So these are the different alternatives. Either give it to a katan, and then we have a machlokas, but we paskin a katan shehigia lechinuch, in which case the kid needs only to drink 2 point out, just a little bit, or the alternative would be the mekadesh has to drink 4 fluid ounces, either together with 2.1 or just 4 fluid ounces b'sach hakol, and this is because of the rule, the very important rule of ein kiddush ela b'makom Sauda. So even though we're going to make Kiddush even without Orchim, but the Mekadesh would not be allowed to drink the wine unless he has halachically what is called a meal. Okay, so this is things to remember. Again, in Eretz Yisrael, we don't have the problem because the minhag of Eretz Yisrael is not to make Kiddush b'beis Knesset. Oh, my guess is because I know how pushy Americans can be, that there probably are American kehilos that just do their American thing. Yeah. I used to be an American. No, I'll give you another example of this, although I don't want to offend anybody. Everybody, okay, be equal. No, in America, and I did it in my Shul as well, it's very, very common in the summer to have an early Shabbos minyan. And on one hand, it's actually commendable because there is a mitzvah to be makabel Shabbos early, although you have to be careful not too early, etc. But in Eretz Yisrael, the minhag of Eretz Yisrael was not. You could be makabel Shabbos early, but it was not to finish Marav early and then have a meal before the sunset. The minhag of Eretz Yisrael was to at least wait for the meal and Kiddush until dark. That is the minhag of Eretz Yisrael, and this was a minhag that was endorsed certainly by all the Ashkenazi poskim, Rav Shlomo Zalman, Auerbach, Rebbe Yoshev, and the like. But now come these pushy Americans, and they just want to bring their Teaneck or Baltimore minhagim to Eretz Yisrael, and now you'll probably see a lot of people have early Shabbos minhagim. Okay, as I say, though, that's an example of sometimes people kind of bringing minhagim, but of course that's the way minhagim are, really. In fact, I'll tell you something. The Baal Hamor is made. Now, this is fascinating. That the original minhag of Eretz Yisrael was only to have 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, consistent with the other Yomim Tovim. And it was those upstarts from France, this is in the 1200s, who brought their Chutz La'aretz minhagim. So the truth is, the idea of bringing the Chutz La'aretz minhag started very, very long ago. The Baal Hamor, this is Rabbi Zerachia Halevi. He's a very, very famous Rishon, very controversial Rishon, though. The Ramban, for example, knocks him down. He shoots it down. The Ramban strongly disagrees with the Baal Hamor's claim, but the Baal Hamor claims that even in Eretz Yisrael, you should only keep 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, and he said it was an upstart French Balei HaTosfos who brought in the Chutz La'aretz minhagim. Now, occasionally, every once in a while, you do have a bit of a maverick rabbi like Rav David Bar Chaim. Some of you might know him. B'chon Shiloh. He gives and he often will bring up these things. Let's go back to the original things. Whatever he says, we shouldn't have kitniyos in Eretz Yisrael. The restriction when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, you should blow shofar in Yerushalayim. Whatever. The truth is, what he says has some resonance because he is going back to very, very early sources. But nevertheless, halacha has its own form of development, and once something has been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years, we don't simply turn back the clock and say, "Oh, let's do it the way they did it, 500 years ago." Halacha has its own momentum. So we're going to keep 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. We're not going to blow shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. And we're not going to eat kidneys. Well, if you're Ashkenazi, you're not going to eat kidneys. If you're Sephardi, you still have the right to eat kidneys. In fact, it was very nice. I was reading a book about living in Eretz Yisrael, kind of encouraging people to make Aliyah. So the person mentioned that Chol HaMoed Pesach, they went to see a movie. And whatever, and they noticed that they were selling popcorn in the lobby. And the person was so disheartened. I am coming to Eretz Yisrael, and during Pesach, the popcorn. And then she overheard that when somebody ordered popcorn, the kid behind the counter said, "Ato Ashkenazi or Sephardi?" He wouldn't sell to an Ashkenazi. So she said, "Mi ka'amcha Yisrael." It's beautiful. They discriminate. They only sell the popcorn to a Sephardi, not to an Ashkenazi. Yeah.
About that early Shabbos, it became more of a custom here for people with young children.
Well, of course, that is the custom. I mean, that's the basic reason for it. But let me just explain the halachic issue. Halachically, the poskim felt that although you can daven Ma'ariv early, for sure, and you can be Makabel Shabbos early, for sure, but they felt you weren't allowed to make Kiddush and have a meal until it was actually dark. Now, I understand. Now, the truth of the matter is, though, I understand that late Shabbos are hard for kids, but the MS is, in Eretz Yisrael, even a late Shabbos is not as late, meaning it's not the same, meaning it gets dark here much more quickly. So the poskim felt that even for children it wasn't correct. Now, again, I'm not questioning. I mean, people do what they do, and there are reasons for it, but I'm just telling you that the minhag of Eretz Yisrael was not to make Kiddush until dark, even though you can daven Ma'ariv early. Of course, you have to say Shema. Everyone knows that everyone understands, I hope, that if you daven an early Ma'ariv, whether it's Friday night or whether it's during the week even, you do have to say Kriya Shema after it's dark. Because you're not Yotzei Shema, and Shema is a mitzvah d'oraisa for the men at least. And the ability to daven an early Ma'ariv, and you say the Shema in the Ma'ariv, but you're not Yotzei, the mitzvah d'oraisa of Kriya Shema. That's a very important point as well. In terms of counting of the Omer, okay, that's a machlokas. Some will allow you to count the Omer early. Some will say the Omer should also be delayed. And we'll talk about that when we get closer to the counting of the Omer.
Why did the French impose the second day of Rosh Hashanah? What was their svara?
Well, their svara was that even in Eretz Yisrael, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, at least outside of Jerusalem, they had to keep 2 days because Rosh Hashanah is the only holiday that is the first day of the month. And therefore, even Eretz Yisrael, we're not sure when the month was sanctified. In other words, unlike Sukkot, unlike any other Chag, where Eretz Yisrael would already know when Rosh Chodesh was proclaimed, Rosh Hashanah is a problem. Of course, the big question you could ask is this. Even if it makes sense to have 2 days in all of Eretz Yisrael, why have 2 days in Yerushalayim? Because Yerushalayim, they knew what day was sanctified. So that is a good question. But at some point, once it was decided that all of Eretz Yisrael would be 2 days, they didn't want to differentiate Yerushalayim and treat it differently. But this was the sheet of the Balei Tosfos. But as I say, the Baal Hamor is made that the original minhag of Eretz Yisrael in the time of the Gaonim was taka 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, which is really quite an amazing thing. Yeah. Yes.
Now probably, but my question all the years is once we only keep 1 day of Yom Kippur.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, that's an excellent question. And the truth of the matter is, the question was, we keep, let's say even in Chutz La'aretz, right? So we'll keep 2 days of Sukkot, 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. We'll keep even here, but then only 1 day of Yom Kippur. Now the logic of calendrical doubt should require 2 days of Yom Kippur. Yeah. So the short answer is.
But once you do in other words, once you say that.
Yeah.
That you know there was only 1 day of Yom Kippur, for whatever reason. By the time you get to Sukkot, you should also just do 1 day.
No. So the answer is, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, when you didn't have a calendar, and you genuinely didn't know, it could very well be that people had to fast 2 days.
Or la halacha, whatever.
Yeah. But today, where we do know, and it's only a takanas chachamim, so they didn't want to impose the hardship of 2 day fasting. But in modern times, there were people who fasted 2 days in the international dateline. You may recall in Shanghai, right, because there's some halachic uncertainty what the halachic day is. Then there were kama v'kama people who fasted 2 days. On Yom Kippur, yeah.
When Rosh Hashanah was one day,
Yeah.
and was Shabbat, they blew the shofar.
No,
They didn't blow the shofar.
no, they did
There
not.
was no shofar.
There was no shofar at all. That's right. You missed it. You missed it. You missed shofar. That's that thing. Okay. Now, one other thing I want to mention, interesting halacha. This rule that you're not allowed to eat before Kiddush. I'm sorry, yeah.
I wanted to ask something
I'm
about
sorry.
that.
Yes.
Could you push
I
the
visit,
microphone a little closer?
so I visit people and they actually will give their children snacks right after HALACHA snails. And I was a little surprised because I was always brought up to not eat before Kiddush. So I wanted to...
Right. So that's what I mentioned. The Mishnah Berurah brings that many opinions maintain that the prohibition of eating before Kiddush does not apply to ketanim. That in fact, that's the heter of giving the kid the wine, etc. So there is a leniency in that as well. So an adult could not, a child we could be lenient. Yeah, that would be the difference. So this rule that you can't eat before Kiddush, and this is very chomer, even water. So let's see how that works Shabbos morning. A person gets and here we'll have an interesting difference between men and women, fascinatingly. Let me first describe the halacha for the man, then I'll talk about how it might be different for the woman. A man gets up, he didn't daven yet, maybe he said brachos, maybe he didn't say brachos. Now, there are two problems. One is the problem of eating before davening, which is a problem every day of the week. And the other is eating before Kiddush, which is miyuchad, of course, for Shabbos. Now, eating before davening, we have a number of things that a person is allowed to do. At a minimum, a person is allowed to have water. That's for sure. And that gets extended. Water gets an expanded definition. It includes coffee. It includes tea. Some allow coffee with milk. Some allow coffee with sugar. Right. So water gets expanded. But whatever it is. But generally speaking, many types of drinks are going to be okay. Solid food generally should not be allowed unless there's health issues. If there are health issues, that's a separate issue. But generally speaking, any consumption before davening should be limited to liquids. Now, does that change Shabbos morning because it's before Kiddush? The answer is it actually doesn't change, because the chiyuv of making Kiddush does not come upon you till you have davened Shachris. So until I daven Shachris, I don't have an obligation of Kiddush. Therefore, I don't have the prohibition of eating before Kiddush. I only have the prohibition of eating before davening. Eating before davening, I can have coffee, tea, and the like. But once I'm talking about a man now, I'll talk about a woman's law differently. Once I daven Shachris, even if I didn't daven Musaf yet, I have a problem. I now have a chiyuv of Kiddush. Once I have a chiyuv of Kiddush, I cannot even have water until I make Kiddush. Right? So for a man, it's a relatively straightforward issue. Before davening on Shabbos morning, I can have coffee, tea, right, whatever. No, you cannot have mizonos unless there's a health issue. If there's a health issue, you can have mizonos. Once I daven Shachris, I can have nothing until I make Kiddush. Now, I know that you will see in some places, even among some very religious Jews, that some do have a minhag of having mizonos before Shachris, and indeed this is a standard minhag of Chabad, over which they will fight quite vociferously. I mean, there's no point in giving mussar. But if anybody calls it to their attention, they will get very upset because they say, no, the Rebbe said it was okay. So again, the heter they have, I'll just tell you, the heter they have is that because they start davening late, of course, what's the heter for that? But okay, but because they start davening late, so what's going to happen is they're going to be so hungry by later in the day that they will not have kavana, and the claim would be you're allowed to eat if it's necessary for your kavana. Now, if you have such a minhag, you have it. I'm not going to question it. But if you don't have such a minhag or such a mesorah, one should, and there's no health issue, one should not have mizonos before shachris. That is true during the week. I'm talking for a man. I'll talk about a woman a little differently. That is true during the week, and that is certainly true Shabbos morning. And once a man davens shachris, they're not allowed to even have a glass of water until they make Kiddush. Now, this is for a man. I'm going to mention why a woman might be a different problem. Yeah. So that's true. If you get up before dawn, alos hashachar, which will again, everything is a machlokas here, but let's define dawn as 72 fixed minutes before sunrise. Machlokas what sunrise is in Yerushalayim, but okay. So before dawn, you are allowed to eat anything you want, and that's true both for Kiddush and for Tefillah. Yeah, so you can have a whole meal. If let's say, if sunrise is 6:15, so you get up at 5 a.m., you can have a whole meal without Kiddush, and there's no problem at all, because everything is chal only from Amud HaShachar, because that's the earliest you could daven, and the earliest, therefore, you would be chayav to say Kiddush if you daven Shabbos. Yeah.
Come late to Shul every week, 8 o'clock, does that make you like Chabad?
Well,
No, I come on time.
I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, well, Chabad is not the worst offender. I mean, there are actually places that are much worse than Chabad. Chabad is, moderately missing zmanim. So the question really, I don't want to call this a Chabad issue. I mean, I think Chabad is, well, maybe other Hasidim eat mazonos too, but Chabad is mazonos. But Zman is an endemic issue with Hasidim in general. That they often were not makbid on zmanim. The exception historically was ger, and this goes back to the Sfas Emes, meaning before the Sfas Emes, ger was like other Hasidus. They also missed all the zmanim. The Sfas Emes was very makbid that they keep the zmanim. How they get around it, it's very difficult to justify. I mean, part of their argument would be this, that mi'ikar hadin, when a person is capable of a great level of kavana and they're not able to achieve it, they're exempt from the mitzvah until they can reach that level of kavana. So they claim they needed hours and hours. But those are types of arguments that may apply to the Rebbe or to the tzaddik. I mean, I don't know how they can really apply to every individual person. So it's difficult. I mean, again, it's hard to be malamed zechus. But we have to assume that if this was the hanhaga that the Rabbeim gave them, if that was the case, then we have to assume that there's something to it. But as they say, generally speaking, we should keep the zmanim. Yeah.
Go to a hotel here, because my hotel very mahadrin.
Yeah.
Before shul, there's always cake and coffee.
Yes. So number one, part of it is for the kids.
Yeah.
And remember, the kids can certainly eat before davening. And before Kiddush as well. And part of it is for Hasidim that have such a minhag, etc. But again, I don't want to make life hard for anybody. So I don't mean to be machmer. Whatever your minhagim are, you could follow them. But generally, okay. So now I want to talk about the women a little bit. Now we have to go back to the same issue. But in order to understand women, we have to ask this question. What is a woman's obligation in tefillah? Because we see by a man, right, until he davens shachris, he can have coffee, tea, milk, juice. Juice, okay. After he davens shachris, he's chayiv and Kiddush can't have anything. So we see that tefillat shachris is a big dividing point. The question is, what is the definition of tefillat shachrit for a woman? Or to put it another way, does a woman have to daven, even during the week, a full shachris? So this is a huge machlokas going all the way back between the Rambam, Maimonides, and the Ramban. According to Ramban, Nachmanides, a woman is obligated to daven a full Amida. This is during the week now. In other words, a woman has to daven a full Shemona Esrei, a full Shachris. This is Ramban. According to the Rambam, a woman is obligated to daven, but it doesn't have to be the nusach of an Amida. A woman can be Yotzei with a minimal supplication. Some say Moda Ani is already enough for her davening. Some say Birchot HaShachar is enough. It doesn't have to be a full Amida. L'chatchila, the way girls are taught in the standard Beis Yaakov, is they're generally taught they got to do a whole thing. On the other hand, it's also well known that if a woman is raising young children and there are difficulties, halacha does allow her to rely on the opinion of the Rambam that a short, just Birchot HaShachar, or maybe even Maida Ani, or Vakar Kamenetsky said, even one of the Birchot HaShachar, Amaver Sheina, which is the paragraph, is enough to be a complete tefillah. So, and again, the truth is, even women without children, if davening a whole Shachris is difficult for them, they could rely on the Rambam Shita. So, what's interesting is this is fascinating. The Rambam is lenient, Ramban is machmir. But it turns out, Shabbos morning, the positions are going to be reversed. Once a woman has said morning brachos, she has davened a halachic shachris. So, let's imagine, did you ever see the video of Rav Chaim Kanievsky and his Rebbitzin? They were saying morning brachas to each other so each could answer Amen. The Rebbitzin said it and she said it. So it's interesting, if this would have been Shabbos morning, the Rebbitzin would not be allowed to have a cup of coffee after her Birchot HaShachar, but Rav Chaim would be allowed to have a cup of coffee after his Birchot HaShachar. And the reason is, Rav Chaim did not yet daven Shachris. The Rebbitzin, at least b'diavad, davened a halachic Shachris. So what's interesting is that the woman's Iser of eating before Kiddush may take effect before the man's Iser of eating before Kiddush, because the woman's chovat hatfilah is satisfied, or may be satisfied, with Birkat HaShachar. An amazing thing. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein qualifies this with a very, very big leniency. Rav Moshe says, a married woman is never obligated in Kiddush until her husband is obligated in Kiddush. And therefore, Rav Moshe's point was, even if a woman said Birkat HaShachar, and l'chayra, even if a woman davened Shachris legamri, if her husband did not yet daven Shachris, she is not subject to the Kiddush rules, and therefore, in fact, it's a strange thing. If she's not subject to the Kiddush rules, that actually means, but she davened Shachris, she could actually eat everything. I mean, she could eat Mazona, she could eat everything without Kiddush, because she's not chayeves in Kiddush until her husband. That's a very interesting Kiddush, and what we many people follow that. You could certainly, after 120 years, you can always say, I followed Rav Moshe Feinstein, you're going to be safe. But what's interesting is that is only a svara for a married woman, that is not a svara for your single daughters. So for your single daughters, it will still be the case that once they said Birkas HaShachar, they should not have a cup of water until they make Kiddush. But, there's another leniency, and that is, if it is the girl's minhag to always daven a full Shemona Esrei. And some say, even if it is her minhag that only on Shabbos she davens a full Shemona Esrei, then we say her Kiddush obligation doesn't take effect till after that Amida. So the Bekitzer, the rule generally is that we start off with a principle, but then it branches off into two different leniencies. The principle is that in the abstract, once a woman has said Birkat HaShachar, she should not be allowed to eat anything until she makes Kiddush.
But she can make it.
Oh yeah, she don't have to. Yeah, that's the principle, but it branches off into two exceptions to that principle. Exception one is Rav Moshe's rule for a married woman that she is not obligated in Kiddush until her husband davens Shachris. And branch off number two is any girl who either normally davens a full Shemona Esrei, or even if only on Shabbos davens a full Shemona Esrei, is entitled to say that their tefillah has not been mukuyam until that Amida, and therefore she's exactly like the man who said morning brachos, in which the man was not Makayim tefillah yet, and therefore he couldn't eat a whole meal, but he could have coffee, tea, and the like, and she could have the same thing. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a very strange klal, and I guess I just don't understand. But to me, there doesn't seem that there's such a thing. You can't do a half a mitzvah and then take a break and do something else and do another half a mitzvah. If you're chayiv in Shacharis, if the chiyuv is all of Shacharis, then just by saying part of the thing, you've not been Mekayim, you've not been Mekayim Shacharis, but you've become a start of Shacharis. And just like you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei, you can't decide, well, that's enough, and I'm going to take a drink first.
No, but it's more than that. It's not. In other words, according to the Rambam, a woman who says Birkat HaShachar is not Mekayim half a mitzvah. She's Mekayim a whole mitzvah, meaning that's her only obligation.
And that's if she intends to be yotze with that. But if her minhag is to eat, say a full shach.
No. So that's the leniency. In other words, she said Birkat HaShachar. She didn't say Tefillah yet. Since she was mechaven not to be yotze with Birkat HaShachar, so she's like a man before davening. So she can have what you can have before davening. In other words, I'm not saying she can eat a whole meal. She can have coffee, tea. She's like a man before davening. That's all.
Not just she's doing half a mitzvah. And then
No, it's not because it's half a mitzvah. Let's say it's a zero mitzvah, but she can eat before davening. Those things that you're allowed to eat before davening. Yeah.
But a woman is not allowed, before she davens every day, let's say, she's not allowed to eat a piece of cake either?
That's correct. So here's what I would tell a woman who has to take care of children. What I would tell a woman who has to take care of children is that she should say Birkos HaShachar, be somech on the Rambam that is a valid davening, and then you can eat cake or whatever it is if you find that's necessary for what you have to do. But ein echadami, a woman should not have mizonos until she says, let's say Birkos HaShachar. That's actually true, because a woman absolutely has some obligation to daven. Like the Ramban, it's long. Like the Rambam, it can be very short, but there is an obligation to do something. In fact, even Birchas HaShachar is lav dafka. I mean, even at the China, please Hashem, help me through the day. That would be enough, but there has to be something. They say the Brisker Rav, let me go back to this. There's another machlokas, the Rambam and the Ramban. It's actually connected, but I don't want to go through how they're connected. Whether davening to Hashem every day is a Torah commandment. The Rambam, Maimonides, actually says there's a mitzvah every day to daven to Hashem, in your own words. So according to the Rambam, tefillah is da'oraisa, even though the nusach of tefillah is later. The Ramban actually says that prayer to Hashem is a rabbinic requirement unless you're in a time of tzara. When you're in a time of eis tzara, then you're mechuyev d'oraisa to daven. Rav Soloveitchik used to say that really the Rambam agrees to the Ramban that the mechayev of tefillah is eis tzara, but he considers life to be an existential crisis. So life is inherently defined as an eis tzara, which would mean actually, let's say now it could very well be halachically we're defined as an eis tzara, so it could be that even Ramban would say tefillah is deoraisa. Now, what's interesting is that they say the Brisker Rav used to constantly mutter during the day, the Eibusher soll helfen, the Eibusher soll helfen. So people want to say, because he was choshesh, that every minute might be an Eis Sarah, so he wanted to fulfill the chiyuv of the Ramban to daven to Hashem by saying the Eibusha Zol Holfen. But the way their masber is, it's not that he actually felt it was a tzara. He was choshesh for the mitzvah. In other words, it says, it's not that, I think there's a tzara. Rather, if there is a tzara, I have to do this mitzvah, so I better do this mitzvah. So it was the mitzvah that gave him the tzara. Yeah.
Make the women feel better. I don't know who said this, but I think Rabbi said that Shabbat B'Kosha Hodah is a tefillah. That's how most Esrei
that's correct.
Organized. So if the last bracha of Birchos HaShachar is Hama'avir Sheina Me'enai Yitnua Me'achapai, that's your Shabbat. Then there's Yehirat Tzom Mefanach Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Elokeinu. That's your Bakasha, and then that ends with Baruch Atah Hashem Gomel Chasidim Tovim Yamo.
That's the Hodah.
That's your Hodah.
Right,
So
right.
Say that it actually contains
Yep.
elements of Sheba Bakasha.
No, that's exactly correct.
Really
Yeah.
are fulfilling.
No, I think I mentioned B'Shem Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky that the last bracha of Birchat HaShachar is sufficient. It's not even all of them. It's nice to say all of them, but it's the last bracha alone, Hamaver Sheni, with that paragraph, has those three elements, and that would be enough to be Makayim, the Chovas HaTfilah, according to Rambam. And as I say, a woman with children, certainly. In fact, it was absolutely the minhag in Europe. I mean, for women to do it. Now, because of Beis Yaakov's, because there weren't Beis Yaakovs until the 1920s, the girls are taught a stricter standard. But, the Chavetz Chaim's mother, and the Chavetz Chaim records his own mother did not daven a Shemona Esrei every day, and Baruch Hashem, her kids turned out pretty good in that way. So one should not be overly machmer if it takes a person away. It takes away Yishuv Hadas. Okay. All right, so that was just an interesting point where the leniency of women's tefillah could potentially create a stringency Shabbos morning. Okay. So the final issue I just want to talk about once again, obviously, one of the most familiar halachos of Kiddush is that a man comes home and generally can make Kiddush for his wife. Again, halachically, she could make Kiddush. No, there is no problem with a woman saying Kiddush. Absolutely not. But the normal custom is, husband makes Kiddush for his wife. And this apparently obvious custom actually raises certain problems. There is a very, very amazing psak of the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Yecheskel Landau. Yecheskel Landau was the Rav of Prague in the 1700s, a great gadol, one of the greatest of the Achronim. His Tshuvas are Noda B'Yehuda. His commentary on Shulchan Aruch is Dogel Mervava. It's the same person. By the way, as a little aside, it's very interesting. He also has a sefer of drushos, and in the drushos is a hesped that he gave for his wife, his Rebbetzin. And in the hesped, he identified things that I think any congregational rabbi could identify with. He thanked his wife because he says there were times that he was so frustrated and angry at members of the Kehillah, and she always calmed him down and made him see the other side of things. So he says he wanted to thank her for that precious gift. He says he doesn't know who's going to calm him down now, now that she's gone. But be it as it may, here's what he says. This is quite amazing. He says, a man that has davened Arvit in the Beit Knesset cannot make Kiddush for his wife who has not davened Arvit in the Beit Knesset. Meaning, if they both davened Arvit, no problem. If they neither davened Arvit, no problem. And if he didn't daven and she davened, again, no problem. But in the particular configuration where he davened Arvit and she didn't, the Noda B'Yehuda paskins, the man cannot make Kiddush for his wife. She would have to make the Kiddush herself. What's going on? What's going on? Why is that so?
She davened at home.
No, that's fine. Again,
You said in Beit Knesset.
no, I didn't. First, I don't think I even said in Beit Knesset. But either way, if they both davened, I don't care. Yeah, it could be at home, or if they both davened, no problem. No matter where they davened. If neither davened, no problem. But if the man davened, whether Beit Knesset or at home, and she did not daven, he cannot make Kiddush for her. Why is that so? So here's the argument. The argument is, we mentioned that the requirement of Kiddush on wine and Kiddush b'makom su'udah are requirements, to be sure, but they are only rabbinic requirements. D'oraisa, you're yotzei without wine, and d'oraita, you're yotzei without food. Therefore, when a man davens arvit, even if they didn't make Kiddush and Shul, by saying the paragraph vayachulu, he has fulfilled his Torah obligation of Kiddush. Yes, rabbinically, he's still chayav to make Kiddush. Rabbinically, he has to make Kiddush, for sure, because of the requirement of meal and wine. But he's not chayav on a Torah level. By contrast, the woman who has not davened, arvit, is chayav on a Torah level. Now, in order to be motzi, in order for me to do a mitzvah for you, I have to have the same level of chiyuv. That's why a katan, a kid below bar mitzvah, cannot be motzi me. That is why a goy who can read Hebrew cannot be motzi me, because he's not obligated. So the same idea that somebody who's not obligated can't do the mitzvah for somebody who is obligated. If I'm only obligated rabbinically, but I'm not obligated under Torah law, I can't do the mitzvah for somebody who's obligated under Torah law. So, if we both davened Mariv, whether in Shul or at home, we're both only obligated rabbinically, so Rabbanan can do Rabbanan. If neither of us davened Arvit, we're both obligated under Torah law, so Torah could be Motzi Torah. But if the man davened Arvit, he's only obligated in Kiddush rabbinically. The woman who didn't daven Arvit is obligated in Kiddush under Torah law. Man cannot recite Kiddush for wife. So in order not to, I will not stop the, even if I'm out of town, I will not stop the class here because this would be a catastrophic place to break. So I need to say right away, that we do not paskin. No, I can't let you go without this. We do not paskin like this very interesting chiddush of the Noda B'Yehuda. And there are a lot of interesting reasons why we don't paskin like this. First of all, the Mishnah Berurah points out a number of reasons why we don't. He brings the Dogol Mirvava, the Noda B'Yehuda, but says we don't follow him. And he says a few reasons. He says, first of all, if a man has intention that he's going to make Kiddush at home, it is ki'ilu he has specific kavana not to fulfill his Kiddush obligation with vayachulu. So when he comes home, he's still da'oraita, because his kavana was not to be yotzei. That's point number one. Point number two maybe is the opposite. If you're going to tell me he's yotzei Kiddush d'oraita with vayachulu, then she's yotzei Kiddush d'oraita with lichbenching, when she said words of Shabbos, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvosav b'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbos. Or maybe she's even yotzei, assuming they talk to each other, when she says good Shabbos or Shabbat Shalom. She said words of Shabbos. So either, it's symmetrical, either they're both d'oraita, because he had kavanah not to be yotzei, or they're both drabanan because she lit candles and she said good Shabbos. So for various reasons, therefore, the Mishnah Berurah says this is not a problem. And then he goes out to a more fundamental, there's actually a more fundamental reason, a deeper reason, which Rabbi Kiveger identifies. And that is the principle of Kol Yisrael Arev and Zelazeh, meaning to say that, listen, let's assume I made Kiddush, but I could still make Kiddush for another person because everyone is responsible for everybody else. So the same way I could make Kiddush for a guest who shows up, I could make Kiddush for my wife. She's no worse than anybody else. Meaning, she's better, right? So there is a principle. This is actually the main reason, that even if we assume the man was Yotzei Kiddush, he could still make it for his wife based on the principle of Kol Yisrael, Arev and Zelazah. So again, I bring up the Noda B'Yehuda not to scare anybody, because again, it's absolutely clear we do not follow him. But it's such an interesting observation and a Chiddush, kind of a creative way of looking at it, that I wanted to just share it with you. But again, la halacha, the Mishnah Berurah says there is no problem. So whatever, husband comes home from Shul, even if the wife did not say Arvit, he can certainly make Kiddush for his wife. Okay, so
woman be motzi her husband in Kiddush.
Absolutely. Men and women are equal in Kiddush. There is nothing wrong with a woman making Kiddush for a man. Now, there are some things she cannot do for a man. For example, she could not blow shofar for her husband, because a woman is not chayevet in shofar. It's a minhag, but she's not chayevet in shofar, so she could not blow shofar for her husband, but she could recite Kiddush for her husband. Birkat Hamazon, the same thing. Well, that the Gemara has a question, because a woman's obligation may only be rabbinic, so it's better for a woman not to bench for her husband. But Kiddush, they're exactly the same, so a woman could say Kiddush. Now, Megillah reading is an interesting machlokas. Can a woman read for a man? Many poskim say yes. The Tosfos brings the Baal Hilchos Gedolos, who says no. So that's an issue. Can a woman read Megillah for a man? Okay, we'll stop here. Have a good week, everybody.